What was the most cursed weapon in medieval history? Many believed that certain weapons carried a dark fate. A sword that killed too many men was said to remember every drop of blood. Warriors whispered that some blades brought madness or death to their owners. In an age ruled by superstition and fear, people saw these weapons as living things that demanded payment for every victory. Whether real or imagined, cursed weapons became symbols of guilt, war, and the price of violence. Number 1. The Legend of the Cursed Blade. In medieval times, people often believed that a weapon could be more than metal and edge. They thought a sword might carry anger, suffering, or the sins of those who made it. That idea gave birth to stories of cursed blades that haunted their owners and sowed tragedy. One of the earliest examples comes from Norse sagas. There's a sword called Tyrfing, crafted by dwarves under obligation. The makers curse it so that every time it is drawn, it must kill. It brings misfortune and death to successive owners. The curse follows families across generations. In stories, it feels alive, driven by dark necessity rather than human intent. Another weapon of legend is Skofnung, once wielded by kings in Norse lands. Its lore includes rules and taboos. Warriors warned, never unsheath it without cause, never let sunlight touch its hilt. Its wounds will not heal normally, only a special stone can heal those hurt by it. These kinds of tales mix danger with ritual, showing how people try to contain fear by naming rules. In Icelandic tales, there is also Dáinsleif. It is said to never miss when drawn, and always slays someone once unsheathed. Once used, it demands a life. That detail turns the sword into a moral burden. The wielder cannot use it lightly. The weapon forces choices and consequences. These legendary swords show how medieval people made sense of violence. They believed killing leaves a stain. A blade that has tasted blood again and again might hold echoes of those acts. Thus, a cursed weapon isn't just magic in a story. It becomes a symbol. It stands for guilt, destiny, the past refusing to be silent. Christian Europe did not ignore these fears. Knights often brought their swords to be blessed. Clergy performed rituals, asking God to guard the sword and its owner. The effort shows they believed weapons could be contaminated by sin or evil. Ritual made the sword part of a spiritual contract. It would be a tool of just war, not one of demon influence. At councils and in law codes, some forms of weapon use were condemned outright. Using crossbows against Christians was banned in certain places. That kind of ban treats a weapon's use as morally weighted. The tool carries meaning beyond its form. When people give instruments moral weight, they're comfortable believing some become cursed. So when we talk of the most cursed blade, we begin with these legend swords. Tyrfing, Skofnung, and Dáinsleif are more than myths. They reflect real fears in medieval minds. They show how people thought about blood, memory, and fate. The Cursed Blade is a story about how violence never leaves an instrument untouched, and for medieval people, a sword might carry the very weight of what it had done. Number 2. The madness behind the steel. In medieval times, people didn't talk about mental health or trauma, but war left deep scars on anyone who fought. Knights and soldiers came home changed, restless, and haunted by what they had done. Many couldn't sleep, and others said they heard voices at night or saw the faces of men they had killed. People didn't understand what we now call trauma, so they looked for another reason. Often, they blamed the sword. If someone went mad or turned violent, they said the blade had taken his soul, or was whispering to him. It made sense back then. A sword was more than a weapon. It was a symbol of power, pride, and even faith. Losing it could mean losing your honor. Every knight believed his sword carried part of his spirit, so when a man changed after battle, it felt like the sword had changed him. The Middle Ages were full of stories about blades that caused madness or demanded blood. People said some swords refused to stay sheathed until they had killed. Others were said to hum or glow before a death. These legends reflected real fear. Combat in those times was brutal. You saw death up close, smelled it, felt it. The human mind struggled to live with that. The idea that steel itself could absorb evil was easier to believe than the thought that war could break a man from the inside. Blacksmiths were also part of this fear. Their work looked almost supernatural. They used fire, smoke, and sparks to shape metal into deadly art. People said that if a smith forged a weapon with hatred or spilled his own blood into the iron, the weapon would carry that darkness. That's why knights wanted their blades blessed before battle. They believed a prayer could wash away any evil in the metal. Some even paid priests to anoint their swords with holy oil. But not every story came from superstition. Many so-called cursed weapons probably earned their reputations from real events. If a sword broke at the wrong time or caused an accidental death, rumors spread fast. Imagine 3 men dying while carrying the same blade. To a medieval mind, that couldn't be coincidence. It had to be cursed. Fear and guilt turned small accidents into ghost stories. War also blurred the line between faith and madness. Men saw victory as divine reward and defeat as punishment. When they couldn't explain what happened, they blamed something tangible, their sword, their armor, or even the battlefield itself. A weapon became a mirror for the darkness inside them. In the end, the madness behind the steel wasn't about demons or black magic. It was about people trying to make sense of fear and guilt they couldn't name. A cursed sword was a way to tell that story without admitting weakness. It was easier to say the steel was haunted than to face what war really did to the human mind. Number 3. The blood oath and the blacksmith's curse. In the medieval mind, a weapon began its life long before it tasted blood. It began in the forge, where heat, hammer, and breath turned dull iron into a thing with purpose. People believed the smith did more than shape metal. They thought he poured intention into it. If a blade was born in anger or made for revenge, that mood could cling to the steel. A noble who felt wronged might demand a sword that would end quarrels quickly. A smith who felt cheated might spit a curse under his breath as he worked. In a small town where everyone knew everyone, a story like that traveled faster than a cart on a dry road. Once a weapon got a reputation, the owner felt it every time he buckled on the belt. The ritual around making and taking a sword fed this feeling. Knights swore oaths on the hilt because a sword stood for honor and judgment. Priests blessed blades to draw a line between force and cruelty. Some forges kept their doors half open at night so the iron could breathe, and some workshops were set outside the town because people worried the ringing of iron upset the dead. When a smith spoke a promise over the anvil, customers listened. If he promised speed, the owner looked for speed. If he muttered about betrayal, the owner feared betrayal. That is how a practical tool picked up a moral shadow before it ever left the fire. Blood oaths brought the shadow closer. A lord might cut his thumb and let a drop fall on the blade as a pledge. An officer might vow never to sheathe the sword until a debt was paid. These gestures made sense in a world that took oaths seriously. The problem came later when the world failed to match the vow. If the debt was messy or the fight dragged on, the owner felt trapped by his own words. He started to treat chance and failure as signs that the sword wanted something. In that mood, a chipped edge was not bad luck. It was the blade punishing him for breaking faith. A sudden triumph was not skill. It was the steel answering the oath. There was also fear of the maker's temper. Blacksmiths lived with constant risk. Burns, smoke, and strain wore them down. If a powerful client paid late or pushed too hard, tempers flared. A blade born out of that pressure carried an awkward story into the market. Buyers asked quiet questions. Was the master at the anvil or the apprentice? Was the iron new or reworked? Did the quench go clean? Did the smith say anything strange? Each answer shaped how men felt when the weapon was drawn in a tight spot. Feelings then shaped decisions. A fighter who believed a blade was touchy hesitated when he needed nerve. Another who believed his sword demanded blood pushed too far and started a feud he could not end. The curse gained strength in the next hands. Weapons did not sit still in one family. They moved through war bands, gift exchanges, ransoms, and booty. If 3 owners of the same sword died badly, even years apart, the story wrote itself. People noticed the pattern and stopped asking hard questions. Was the third man reckless? Was the second drunk? Was the first already marked by enemies? Patterns beat facts when the nights were long and the roads were unsafe. Men began to manage the risk like sailors reading the wind. Some wrapped a blade in cloth and kept it hidden until the last moment. Some touched a church wall with the tip before a campaign. Some avoided letting the sun strike the fuller because they heard a master once warned against it. None of this changed the metal, but it changed the owner. And in close combat, the owner was half the weapon. When a forged thing seems to lean on fate, people look for a human cause. The most human cause is a wound. If a smith felt betrayed and swore that no good would come of a certain sword, that story outlived him. It did not need magic to travel, it needed memory and repetition. A nephew heard it from an uncle. A captain heard it from a camp follower. A priest heard it in confession and told a warning in a different town. The curse became a frame for fear and a script for how people acted. When a fight started in a tavern and a man fell on his own blade, nobody said the floor was slick. They said the smith's promise had come due. And with every retelling, the oath at the anvil grew sharper than the edge itself. Number 4. The burden of blood and memory. In the Middle Ages, people treated a weapon like a partner that remembered everything done with it. A sword did not only cut, it carried the story of who owned it, who died by it, and why it was drawn. That story clung to the steel in the minds of everyone who saw it. After a hard campaign, a knight might polish his blade until it shone, yet he still felt a weight he could not rub away. He believed the metal held traces of grief and rage, and that belief shaped how he moved and how he slept. Armor could be mended and shields replaced, but a favored sword often stayed for years. Each fight added another layer of meaning, and that meaning changed the owner as much as the edge changed from wear. People noticed patterns and turned them into warnings. If a blade was present at a feud, then a duel, and later a sudden death, the sequence became a lesson about fate. The lesson traveled faster than the facts. One man said the sword brought quarrels wherever it went. Another said it demanded blood before peace returned. Soon the weapon felt dangerous, even when it lay still, because reputation works on the nerves the way a drum works on marching feet. Men tried to manage that pressure with habits that made sense in their world. Some kept strict rules about when the sword left its scabbard. Some touched a church door with the tip before a journey. Some spoke a quiet apology to the dead, while cleaning dried stains from the fuller. These acts gave the owner a way to live with the past without falling apart. The burden also showed up in how communities handled captured arms. Taking an enemy's sword was both prize and problem. It proved skill, yet it also brought the shadow of the old owner's deeds into a new household. Families sometimes hid such trophies or offered them to a church, not because they feared visible ghosts, but because they feared the return of old conflicts. A known blade could reopen wounds faster than an insult. Even the smell of oil and iron stirred memories in veterans who had seen too much. Over time, the idea grew that certain weapons pulled trouble the way a magnet pulls filings. It was not always superstition. It was a way to talk about grief, guilt, and luck with simple images people understood. Steel became the vessel that held what words could not hold. When people called a weapon cursed, they often meant the past was still present, and no one had figured out how to set it down.